Behold, I send you out as sheep among wolves. Be ye as wise as serpents and as harmless as doves. Victor Sims, The Z, his story. Now let's begin with the elephant in the room. In a lot of literature, missionaries stand accused of being agents of colonialism and are charged with contributing to the destruction of indigenous African culture and values using Western-type education and Christianity as their main tools. Furthermore, many are said to have been driven by an attitude of spiritual and ethnocultural superiority, and thus, like many of their contemporaries, they accepted the myth that Africa was the dark continent, an embodiment of savagery, intractable ignorance, callous barbarity, and the epicenter of evil. Now, these are serious allegations, so the question is, are missionaries innocent or guilty as charged? But before we pass any verdict, let's look at some of the earliest missions in northern Rhodesia to try and better inform our judgment. In 1875, one of the first missions was established towards the southern end of Lake Malawi at Cape Maclear in Nyasaland by a group of Free Church of Scotland missionaries led by Lieutenant E.D. Young and a young doctor named Robert Laws, with 6 other Europeans and 4 ex-slaves. The mission was called Livingstonia after David Livingstone, who died in 1873 and rekindled British support for missions in East Africa. Unfortunately, its initial location was malarial, and after a few years, the mission was forced to move north to Bandawi, and then again to healthier high ground between Lake Malawi and the Nyika Plateau in 1894. By then, Dr. Laws had taken over running of the mission after the departure of Lieutenant Young and would remain in charge for over 50 years. The mission gradually developed into a small town with a school, church, hospital, post office, and workshops. Notably, the school offered facilities which encouraged pupils from as far afield as Zambia and Tanzania. Between 1884 and 1956, the Livingstonia mission carried out extensive missionary work in northern Rhodesia, especially in the eastern, northern, central, and Copperbelt provinces. Further, from 1956 to 1984, the Livingstonia mission work was continued by the Church of Central African Presbyterian, a product of the Livingstonia mission and the local Zambian people. So in other words, the CCAP is a sister church to the Reformed Church in Zambia, the United Church of Zambia, and the Uniting Presbyterian Church of Southern Africa. Another mission under the London Mission Society was established by Edward Ho at Lofu in 1883. He too was following in the footsteps of Dr. David Livingstone. Now, something interesting to note is that whilst at Lofu, the missionaries realized that they needed a route to bring much needed supplies to their station. The British were already active in Nyasaland, now Malawi, and it seemed the best route to use was via Lake Nyasa. Fortunately, James Stevenson from Scotland donated £4,000 for a road between Lakes Nyasa and Tanganyika, and a road was built which was later named the Stevenson Road. When it was completed, the first load along the Stevenson Road was a boat named the Good News, carrying Bibles and other supplies to the Lofu station. The missionaries at Lofu had the ambitious idea of spreading the good news around the entire Lake Tanganyika area. However, most indigenous peoples in the area couldn't see anything good about the news and opted to stick to their own religious practices, whilst the missionaries narrowed their focus mainly on the peoples living near their mission. After several deaths at Lofu, the mission was moved to Nyamukolo. But after it became apparent that the Lungu people of Nyamukolo were not in the least bit amiable to the new religion, the missionaries moved to Fwambo to try their luck with the Mambwe people. Soon after establishing the mission at Fwambo, missionaries noticed the low numbers of Mambwe attending reading and writing classes, and soon realized they had encountered another problem. After further investigations, it was discovered that the Mambwe were actually reluctant to attend school, as the majority thought school was work and expected payment for their attendance. It was then that one of the missionaries by the name of Picton Jones took it upon himself to learn the local language, and by 1901 he had not only learnt the language but produced the first New Testament Bible in Mambwe. Picton Jones had built another station at Kambole in 1889, and another station was built in Bembaland at Mporokoso. Throughout these years, the slave trade was still ongoing and many Mambwe people had clustered around the mission stations, not primarily to learn the new religion, but for safety reasons, especially from the Bembas who acted as intermediaries for the Swahili slave traders. By the early 1900s, Picton Jones had taken a group of Mambwes across the country to King Kazembe's Lunda land and set up a mission station at Mbereshi. David Kawandami was one of the Mambwe missionaries who stayed at Mbereshi until 1950. Another group of missions that rivaled the Free Church of Scotland were the White Fathers. The nickname White Fathers derived from their white robes. The White Fathers were the largest missionary society to operate in Zambia, as well as one of the earliest to settle in the country. The first station was among the Mambwe in the Tanganyika-Malawi corridor, established in 1891 via the Stevenson Road. In 1895, they got permission to set up a mission in Bembaland at Kanyambi. Joseph Dupont worked there and he gained the nickname Moto, which means like fire. Joseph Dupont was medically trained, and it is believed when Chief Mambo of the Bemba people got sick, he was called in to assist. Although he couldn't cure the chief, he did manage to relieve the pain, and for this, the White Fathers were allowed to set up another mission at Chilumbula in 1898. And in 1899, another mission was opened at Chilonga. First school at Kanyembi started small with only about 14 ex-slaves. The Bemba though took to school life quite eagerly, and by 1897 there were 235 children. Some attribute this unparalleled success by the White Fathers to the fact that unlike other missions, the fathers paid Bemba children to actually attend school. The French François Coiler also set up the Paris Evangelical Mission in 1885. Coiler had been working among the Basutu people for over 20 years. He knew that the language in Lozi land was similar to that of the Basutu because of the conquest of the Kololo people in 1838, after which the Lozi adopted the language of their conquerors. By 1887, King Lewanika was back in power, and he urged François Coiler to set up a mission at Lialui. By the end of the 1800s, more missions had been opened by the Paris Evangelical Mission at Senanga, Kazungula, Old Drift, and Nalolo. Other early mission societies in Zambia included Henry Birkenham and Arthur Baldwin of the Primitive Methodists, who worked among the Ila people. The Christian missions in many land, led by Dan Crawford and Henry Pomeroy in Lunda land, and the Dutch Reformed Church, who were asked to set up a mission in Ingoni land by Chief Mpezeni. So now back to the allegation that missionaries were agents of colonialism. I notice here we must avoid generalizing mission work across Africa and focus on the missionaries that came to northern Rhodesia. So to begin with, in Zambia, it is widely accepted that it was the Scottish physician, explorer, and theologian David Livingstone that opened the way for other missionaries to come to Zambia. Livingstone himself was a member of the London Mission Society, and a lot of missionaries actually came to Central Africa following his appeal, or rather his example, between 1853 and 1956. Another important detail, and again I'm avoiding calling these facts, is that by the 1800s, it was Cecil John Rhodes and his British South African company that substantively took control of most of Central and Southern African territories, including Zambia. Rhodes sent out emissaries to chiefs to get signed treaties to allow his company to look for minerals, which of course we know essentially led to them owning the land. Now Cecil Rhodes, though not so much a religious man, had a very pragmatic attitude towards missionaries, and that was at connecting with the indigenes and pacifying the hinterlands. Missionaries were not only better, but they were relatively cheaper than the colonial policemen. Now why is this important to note in considering the allegations leveled against missionaries as agents of colonialism in Zambia? Well, it points to the fact that most missionaries had to rely on often uneasy relations with other European groups in order to get their work done in the harsh, uncharted regions of Africa. Contrary to popular belief, most missionaries did not have the manpower nor the resources to simply come to Africa. To be sure, most of the missionaries who came to the region were dependent on funding from well-wishers, their home congregation, and often colonial administration officers, whose interests, of course, were much more than simply spreading the good news. It was only the Catholic White Fathers who were lucky enough to be financed by the Catholic Church. So while many missionaries worked with the colonial administration, it would be wrong to claim that they were all willing and enthusiastic agents of colonialism. The relationship between missionaries and the colonial powers were much more complex than many of the critics suggest, with many colonial officers as well as missionaries seeing themselves much of the time as anti-imperialist, and their relationship with the empire as deeply ambiguous at best. Another point worth considering is that not all missionaries working in Africa had the same background. Some, like David Livingstone, came from humble beginnings and joined mission societies to genuinely offer their services. Livingstone himself, at the age of 10, worked in a cotton factory to help his large family. During the evenings by candlelight, he studied to become a physician and theologian. By the age of 25, he had finished his studies and joined the London Mission Society. Livingstone was known through large parts of Africa for treating Africans with respect, and the groups that he visited returned his respect with faith and loyalty. Another example was Dr. Laws, who followed in the footsteps of Livingstone. Over time, Laws set up many educational, medical, and social projects, and after World War I, encouraged the formation of native associations in Nyasaland, which were later, in 1938, to become the Nyasaland African National Congress. Laws managed to develop a Christian community of around 60,000, including African pastors, and founded over 700 schools, which on his death were educating some 44,000 pupils. He was responsible for translating the New Testament in Nyanja, published an English Nyanja dictionary, and works in the Tonga language. He fought against continuing Arab slave trade, helped to reconcile local African groups, and played a leading role in educating and encouraging local individuals such as David Kaunda, whose son Kenneth Kaunda was to become Zambia's first Republican president. Clearly, while there's no denying the connection between missionaries and other Europeans, to generalize that all missionaries had ill intent in their work in Africa would be to overlook the great deeds of people such as Doctors Livingstone and Laws and many others. Unlike individuals such as Livingstone and Laws perhaps, many of the other so-called missionaries had a different upbringing which shaped their worldview and later their conduct in Africa. In those days in Europe, nearly all families were large, and in most cases, the first son of any family inherited the family fortune, while other sons had the choice of becoming a member of the army, navy, clergy, or enter into colonial service. Now notice here I don't mention women, because European women at the time, whether rich or poor, just got married and essentially had no rights or prospects. Therefore, while it is certainly true that many 19th century missionaries from Europe and North America came out of a context that assumed supremacy of Western culture and Western religion, and many demonstrated an inexcusable attitude of superiority towards Africans, it would be inaccurate to suggest, as some do, that this was true for the vast majority of missionaries. For the most part, the highly critical evaluation of the 19th and early 20th century missionary works appears somewhat unrepresentative of all the available evidence, especially from northern Rhodesia. Secondly, evidence also shows that European missionary activities in Central Africa did not largely grow out of imperial intent, but evangelical mindset of Protestant missions and their cultural background in Europe. As such, among those involved in the formation of mission societies were also key leaders of the anti-slavery movement. Finally, it seems too simplistic to identify the attitude of culture and spiritual superiority as the core root of the missionary problem. An important factor which is often overlooked, but which definitely contributed to the mistakes missionaries made, was the lack of cross-cultural knowledge and sensitivity. This was due to the fact that most missionaries had been sent out to the mission field in Africa without any prior cultural and anthropological training, and thus many simply lacked cross-cultural competence. So then what is the verdict? Missionaries in Zambia as agents of colonialism, innocent or guilty? I'll leave that up to you.